Okay, let's dive right in. We're going to go on this incredible 2,000-year journey to understand a story that's, frankly, mind-boggling. It's the story of how humanity went from this slow, steady crawl for millennia to an absolutely explosive sprint in just the last few hundred years.
And that really is the big question, right? Think about it. For most of human history, life was kind of the same, generation after generation. And then, all of a sudden, boom, everything changed. So what was it? What lit the fuse?
So here's our game plan. We're going to set the stage way back in the classical world, which was surprisingly advanced. Then we'll look at what happened when it all kind of crumbled before jumping into the two massive accelerations that literally built the world you and I live in today. And of course, we'll wrap up by asking, so what's next?
All right, let's wind the clock all the way back. Our story starts around the year 100 AD. This was a pretty incredible high point for the ancient world, and it gives us the perfect baseline, a starting line to measure all the insane change that came after.
So what did the world look like back then? Well, the Eurasian continent was basically dominated by two massive superpowers. You had the Roman Empire in the west, this hub of law and order. And then all the way over in the east, you had the Han Dynasty, the powerful Middle Kingdom. These two giants really set the standard for what a complex, organized society could even be.
And it's just wild how advanced they were for their time. I mean, together, they were governing over 100 million people. You've got Rome building these massive aqueducts and roads with concrete, things that would stand for centuries. Meanwhile, Han China is inventing paper and the wheelbarrow and creating this merit-based civil service. This really was the peak of the classical world. But, as you can probably guess, that stability, it just didn't last. The fall of these incredible empires kicks off the next major phase of our story. And this part is a long, slow transition. The world kind of breaks apart, and the pace of change just slows right down to a crawl. And what's crazy is how fast it happened. We're talking just 15 years, a decade and a half, and both of these massive empires start to come apart at the seams. It wasn't like one big thing happened. It was more like a perfect storm of internal fighting and outside pressures that just brought this whole golden age crashing down. Okay, so what happened next is absolutely crucial. It's like a fork in the road for human history. Europe just shatters into this patchwork of competing little kingdoms, and that constant competition, well, it eventually leads to this culture of exploration and looking outward. China, though, it takes a totally different path. It goes through its own tough times, sure, but it always reunites under new dynasties. Its focus becomes more internal, about cultural cohesion. And these two very different paths are going to shape everything for the next 1,000 years.
But here's the thing. Even with all this chaos, progress didn't completely stop. It just went underground, and it got a lot slower. You have these game-changing inventions like gunpowder and the compass popping up in China. And over in Europe, there's this slow, long process of rediscovering all that lost classical knowledge, a lot of it coming through Arabic translations. It's like a slow reawakening, planting the seeds for what would eventually become the Renaissance.
And just when things were slowly rebuilding, bam! A massive, horrifying shock hits the system, the Black Death. It wipes out a third of Europe's population. I mean, it's an unimaginable catastrophe, but it also had this unexpected side effect. It completely upended the economy. Suddenly, with way fewer workers, the ones who were left had more power. The old feudal system starts to crack, and that paves the way for a whole new market-driven world.
Okay, so all of that sets the stage for our first major turning point. We're talking more than 1,000 years of pretty slow, flat growth. And now that line on the graph of human history, it's about to go vertical. This is it. This is where the modern world is born.
So what was the fuel for this explosion? Well, it all started with a revolution in our heads. The Renaissance, the Enlightenment, they completely changed how people thought about the world, shifting the focus to human reason, to individual potential. And the real kicker? The printing press. It was like pouring gasoline on the fire. These radical new ideas could suddenly spread like wildfire, creating this information boom that changed, well, everything. And people didn't just sit around thinking these new thoughts. They turned them into action. That's the Industrial Revolution. It all kicks off with steam power, which just totally transforms factories, trains, you name it. Then comes mechanization. And this is a huge one, the telegraph. Just stop and think about that for a second. For the first time in all of history, a message could travel faster than a person could carry it. It basically shrunk the planet overnight. And if you want to understand just how big a deal this all was, look at this one number: 1 billion. Around the year 1800, the world population finally hit 1 billion people. It took all of human history, tens of thousands of years, just to get to that milestone. And as you're about to see, we were just getting started. So if that first acceleration was like a rocket taking off, the second one was like hitting warp speed. Seriously, the 20th century unleashed a pace of change so fast, so profound, that it was just completely unimaginable to anyone who had lived before.
I mean, get this, even with two of the most devastating wars in history, the global economy just exploded. In a single century, the economic output of the average person on Earth quintupled, 5 times over. That created the truly interconnected, globalized economy we live in today, with all of its upsides and its downsides.
And the engine driving this second, even faster acceleration, it was digital. It all started with one tiny little invention, the transistor. That little thing made compact electronics possible, which gave us the personal computer. The PC then got connected to the internet, which, completely rewired our world. And that brings us to right now, to the age of AI, where technology isn't just a tool anymore. It's becoming a collaborator. So remember that first billion people, the one that took all of human history to reach? Well, get ready for this. The next 7 billion people were added in just over 200 years. Just let that sink in. The sheer scale of that population boom is just staggering, and it was all powered by these two great accelerations.
And all that growth didn't just add numbers, it totally changed how and where we live. I mean, for basically all of history, we were a rural species, living on the land. But then, in 2007, we crossed this invisible but monumental threshold. For the first time ever, more people lived in cities than in the countryside. And that trend is just getting stronger, fundamentally reshaping what it even means to be human. So, after centuries of this unbelievable exponential growth, where do we go from here? That brings us to the final chapter where we're going to look at what might be coming next.
And this is where the story takes a really interesting twist. That explosive growth, the one that's defined the last 2 centuries, it's slowing down. In fact, the rate of our growth peaked all the way back in the 1960s. It's been falling ever since, mainly because fertility rates are dropping pretty much everywhere.
So what does that mean? Well, the UN projects that our population is probably going to peak somewhere around 10.4 billion later this century. And after that, it might actually start to go down. The takeaway here is huge. The era of endless explosive expansion, it seems to be ending. We're moving into a totally new phase of human history. You could call it the age of maturation.
And that leaves us with one last massive question. For a couple hundred years, our whole story has been about more people, more speed, more growth. If that chapter is closing, what's our next great challenge? The game seems to be shifting from how can we grow bigger to how can we find balance? And honestly, what that future looks like is anyone's guess.